was fortunate to have opportunities to work in the laboratory when I was first starting out, and I loved the laboratory. In fact, I remember saying to myself that this was fantastic. I was going to get to play all my life. I'd never have to work, and people were going to pay me for it. And mostly in basic research, doing things in peptide and protein chemistry, so on. Then I let a colleague of mine divert me into some other work as well, and particularly in the area of nutrition and preventive medicine. And I learned a difference. Well, there are a lot of differences, but one of the differences is that when you do basic research, you're supposed to define a problem that you hope you can solve, and then work on it until you understand it, and until you're pretty sure you're right about your conclusions, and then you perhaps come to meetings like this and you explain what you've done. One, to advertise what you've done, and two, so that people can check on you and find mistakes that you might have made. But you're supposed to ask questions you can answer. You're supposed to know what you're talking about and not guess. When we started working on nutrition and preventive medicine, I realized that there was a difference, because there became a moral obligation to guess about what you were doing. Some of the people in that subject were criticized for many of the things that they did, and many of them were justified. The criticisms were justified, but one of the things that I didn't find justified was the criticism that they didn't really know definitively the answers. For example, if someone were to come up to them and say, well, I understand that you do research on vitamin C, and I would like to know how much vitamin C I should eat. Well, a rigorous scientist might say, well, this is a very complicated subject. Very little is known about this, but it's important. It's a subject of active research. We and other laboratories are working on it, and I expect that in about 40 years we'll know the answer to this. Come back then. Well, of course, that's not an answer, because the guy is going to live during that 40 years, and he is going to eat some certain amount of vitamin C over which he has control, either the amount in his food or the amount that he eats in his food, plus that, plus some, and so on. So you don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'll wait, and put your life on hold till we get the answer. Also, you're not really in the position of saying, well, figure it out for yourself. I don't know. Because if that person is truly doing research on vitamin C actively, and he thinks he has some guesses, his guesses are likely to be better than sort of random guesses. So he has sort of a moral obligation to guess. It's important that he not mislead the person into thinking he knows for sure, but he's a scientist, and yet he's supposed to guess. And also, because he's interested in the immediate well-being of human beings, he's undertaking research in things that are very difficult, and that maybe in his lifetime he won't really completely know the answers. So there's a difference. That area is one in which I think guesses are justified. The one I'm going to talk about today is even more difficult, how people learn. I'm sure no one knows the answer to this, and there's nobody that even is certain of how to do it. And anything I say is certainly a guess. Moreover, I'm an experimentalist, and I have very little experimental information on this, but the little bit I do leads me to think that there are some things of interest to say. The little bit of experimentation is very little. I, of course, have my own education, watching myself. All of you have done the same thing. For a brief number of years, I taught introductory chemistry at the University of California at San Diego, and that was a little more experimental experience. And then in the raising of my own family, the children have been homeschooled, and that has given a little more experience. The question now, of course, most people would say you don't have to know anything about education. All this is provided. The government provides the education. We have public schools. All you're supposed to do is have the children, and when they get to a certain age, turn them over to the government, and they will do this job for you. It's a socialism. It's not usually called socialism, but that's what it is. We have this socialized education system, and it works. It'd be one of the only, perhaps the only example in which socialism does work, but somehow this works. I think one of the troubles we have today in the world is that socialism doesn't work, and it isn't working anymore in our public school system. There are many indicators of this. It's hard to read a newspaper, magazine, or anything without seeing this, or you can just drive by a local school and take a look. You don't even have to go in the classrooms in many cases, just look. In quantitative indicators, to mention a few, scholastic aptitude tests have been dropping like rocks over the last 20 or 30 years. In fact, they just tried to patch this up. The SAT scores have dropped over 100 points in the last 20 years. So this is being fixed. The scores are being recentered. They're just adding 100 points to everybody's score from now on to correct for this. They're also making the tests easier. So in fact, all these changes were made on April 1st of this year. The tests have been dumbed down a little bit, and the scores have been recentered, and while we have the same scores that we had 30 years ago. On tests repeatedly given to children in Western countries in subjects like math, science, mathematics is often used as a standard. American children routinely come out last in the Western world in these subjects. I saw one, I don't research all the primary references of these, but one I found especially amusing that I saw was a survey of the kids. First they'd been tested in mathematics, and they'd come out last or near the bottom in mathematical ability. However, they had come out first in the world in another thing. They came out first in the world of their opinion of how good they were at math. So they have self-esteem. They just can't work the problems. But our family got interested in, and let me say something else. Children will learn anyway. All of us will learn as we grow up. We learn every day. You can't stop learning. It's just a question of what you learn. And an educational system doesn't necessarily work because the kids in it learn. It also, first, you can't stop them from learning, and secondly, the American people, we're like any other people, but our population is full of skilled, dedicated people of all kinds. Our children want the same things in life that all children want and that children for generations before them have wanted. Their parents want the same thing for them. There are many people who love to teach. So our schools have many very skilled teachers, very many outstanding students. This is a fact of nature. It's what we would expect in our population regardless of what our system of education is. And sometimes the students get together with outstanding teachers, or whether the teacher's outstanding or not, the student is, we produce many fine students and educated students. The question is whether the system enhances this education or diminishes it. You haven't necessarily taught the student because you stood in front of him and taught him and he learned something. He might have learned more if you hadn't done that. And it's important how much you teach him. We've had this conference and all these wonderful speakers that agreed to come, and most of the people, I hope everyone in the audience has understood what they said. They were very lucid. This audience is made up of people who can think. It's important for the survival of our civilization that all the American people be able to think and be interested in these subjects and be able to understand them. Sally Baliunas put her graphs on the board about ozone. It would be essential that everyone in America, our newspaper reporters, our children, the general public, all be able to read those graphs and understand their implications. She could have done a similar talk, I know because of the things she's written, on the global warming issue. And it's important that all of our people be able to read these graphs, understand them, and think about them. So the education, of course, important to our survival. But just because you stood in front of the children and taught them or pretended to teach them doesn't mean they have learned from you. One example, to get ahead of myself, and then I'll back up a little bit, would be on the issue of spelling. I've got some of my, well, I don't know whether I have my experimental subjects here. I'm their experimental subject, and but the kids are here. But in any case, I'll talk about spelling. After my wife died, a friend of ours was concerned about their progress and 2 or 3 times brought over a standardized spelling test to give to the children. And we don't have any spelling in our home school. We never teach spelling, don't have any examinations, spelling, nothing. And she tested the children and determined their spelling ability on a scale, an age scale. And on average, pretty much one-on-one and also on average, they were about a year behind their ages in spelling, their expected spelling ability for their age. A couple of years later, she tested them again. And again, they were a year behind, as they progressed 2 years in spelling during that 2 years. But they were a year behind what was expected for their age. And this continued. The older ones who finished their elementary education spell fine, and the others are a little behind their normal age. The point I'm making is that they will all be able to spell just fine when they finish. They won't have necessarily met exactly the same standard that students who have spelling lessons do, but they'll learn to spell anyway. Now, if I had, I might be, say, lecturing to you today about spelling, and I could stand up and wave my hands around and tell you about this great method I've got, the examination procedure, the way I do it, how we break the words down, all kinds of procedures necessarily related to how to teach spelling. And I could tell you that I've been doing this rigorously. We have an hour of tough spelling lessons every day, and I've done all this, and my kids know how to spell words. And the implication, of course, is if I hadn't done this, they wouldn't be able to spell. But I'd be fooling myself, because they would have learned to spell anyway. The question is whether what I did was a benefit to them. Now, suppose we had an hour of spelling lessons every day, and therefore, instead of scoring a year behind their age in spelling, they scored a year beyond their age in spelling. Then I could brag even further. Look at this homeschool. It's much better than socialized education. The kids spell better than the kids in the public school. But it took an hour of their time every day. They may have 6 good hours, and I took out of their math, I took out of their science, their literature, their history, their economics. I took out of these subjects to make them better spellers. I would submit that I had actually harmed them rather than helped them, and that I didn't really teach them at all, because they would have learned to spell anyway. This issue has to arise with respect to any kind of education. The child will learn anyway. We start learning as soon as we're born. I've been using a phrase over and over. I don't know when I first, well, I know when I first heard it and started to use it again. Dr. Merrifield used the phrase in the context of an odd experience we had in New Jersey one time. He said, children learn by example. Exactly what he said was, I kept telling him children learn by example, but he didn't believe me. You remember the man? The children learn by example. Dr. Merrifield raised a family the same as ours, very successfully, and he should give this lecture better than me, because he has more experience. But the children learn by example. They learn by observation. You can't stop them from learning. They're going to educate themselves anyway. The question is, can you intervene in some way that improves this, or at least intervene in a way so that you don't diminish their education? Now, there are a lot of social problems in the world today, and of course, we have 3 kinds of education in the United States. We have public education, straight socialism. Now, we can say socialism doesn't work, and if I say it cleverly enough, we might all laugh. But it did work in the Soviet Union for several generations. It worked in that the Soviet Union was there, fed its people, built industry. It built a vast military establishment from which it is still able to extort many of the goods it needs from the rest of the world. I mean, they're not failures in life. They're very smart people who have accomplished a great deal. They would have accomplished more without socialism, but it didn't just fall on its face and die the first year. And there are still socialist economies in the world, and they're still in existence. Socialism doesn't work as well as other things. I actually don't think it should be even evaluated on the basis of whether it works. Capitalism is morally right, or free enterprise is morally right, and I've noticed all the defenses of free enterprise and capitalism usually are based on how much goods they can produce and whether the average person is better off and so forth. Actually, the situation is that free enterprise and capitalism are morally right. Even if they were less productive than socialism, we would have to support them. And we're just lucky that they're more productive. It gives us an additional argument. But socialism, we know, is a less productive way to do things in general, but we've got our public schools that way. So there's the socialized schools. Then parallel to that, there are the private schools for those who can afford to both pay their property taxes and pay for their children's education. And then there are home schools. And the homeschool movement is a recent thing, but growing up over the last 10 to 15 years has also become an important force in American education. I don't really know how many children are homeschooled. It's estimated that between 500,000 and 1 million American children are today being homeschooled. You can, however, see the force of this movement in an effort that was made not long ago to pass a law that would have essentially made the homeschools illegal by demanding certified teachers and various things, giving government control over them to the extent that they go out of existence. And this legislation was proposed in Washington. The homeschoolers only had a couple of weeks to mobilize, and as a result, they said they got more phone calls in Washington than for gays in the military, the congressional pay raise, and the other third largest thing that had ever happened there combined. And when the legislation was finally voted on, whereas straw polls before the legislation had estimated it would pass, when it was finally voted on, there was only one vote in the House of Representatives for the legislation, the guy who proposed it. So the homeschoolers have become a very strong, powerful force in American politics and are functioning as a sort of third form of education. These three forms are in competition with each other. It's not really a free competition, of course, because the public sector is supported by a vast system of property taxes. In any case, we were interested in homeschooling our children. It didn't have anything to do with academics. It had to do with social and basically social influences in the public school system, things that we didn't want our children to learn. Not the things we did want them to learn, the academics, but the things we didn't want them to learn. And we thought that a homeschool would consist of one parent, like in this case my wife, would gather a lot of materials, and she would become the teacher, and a sacrifice would be made in order to keep them out of these social influences. When she died about 6.5 years ago, and we lost the teacher, but still worrying about the social influences, I still kept them at home, but didn't have time to teach them. As a consequence, between the kids and I, we started figuring out what materials they should study, and they started to self-teach. We have a little different kind of homeschool. It's all self-taught. There's no teacher. People sometimes, and the older children have performed very well on examinations and so on, and people come up and they say, "Oh, you've done such a wonderful job educating your children," and all 7 of us know that isn't true because I don't educate them at all. I practically never teach them, and the total amount that I've taught them is not more than 1% of what they've learned. They've learned on their own in a self-teaching atmosphere, given a decent place to work and so on. They're able to teach themselves. So there may be a fourth system. There's the public schools, and then there are the private schools, then there are the home schools that have dedicated teachers in them, and then there's a fourth possibility that they just teach themselves, that we don't have any teacher interaction with the students. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have any interaction with them, because we have to choose the materials that they would learn. And this is a complication, and it's a complication in all forms of education. The question of what you set out supposedly to teach the child. Now, they're going to learn on their own, but the direction, even the materials you put in front of a homeschooled child, will affect a lot what they learn, because it'll affect what they spend their time on. And in many cases, there are several forces that seem to have governed where the public schools have gone in deciding what they will teach the children, private schools and so forth. Largely this is by popular demand. One of the questions is rigor. Regardless of what subject you choose to teach, how rigorously will you teach it, or how hard will the course be, let's say. Or you can make a very hard course out of something that's not worth learning, but let's say how high the quality, or how difficult will it be the materials. You're going to make it real easy or real hard. Are you going to give everybody an A, or are you going to give the average student a C and make it hard to get an A? Where we've gone in the public schools, including the universities, is really where we've gone by popular demand. The kids wanted high grades and easy courses. That's human nature. And the parents who were paying for their education didn't want the child to flunk out. They wanted high grades at least. And so the faculty in the universities gave them what they wanted: easy courses and high grades. So we've had the grade inflation in the universities and some decrease in quality. The public schools is a similar thing. So the fact that our quality has gone down some and our grades have gone up is not a bunch of unprincipled educators sitting around and saying, oh, we're going to make sure these kids don't learn. They're responding somewhat to popular demand. But the rigor is a problem. I have used sometimes an example. I've written it. Some of you have read it anyway. But I think it's important. I think it's an interesting example. During the few years I was teaching freshman chemistry in La Jolla, I was young then, unmarried, and I was downtown with some of the graduate students, and in a little restaurant, a little watering hole in La Jolla, and I looked up from the table, and the door opened, and the door was filled by a fairly large black man with a black leather jacket and a tough look in his eyes. Kind of looking around the room. Well, I immediately looked down, no eye contact. This isn't my kind of, I'm there discussing things with these men. But he came through the door and he walked over to our table and he sat down. He knew the graduate students. He was one of my fellow faculty members. He had been hired as a special faculty member in what was called then the third college for minority students. They'd established 3 colleges at UCSD by then, and he was a faculty member in the third college. Well, this fellow sat down and he talked third world, black power, very, very liberal politics, everything different from what I believed. He was entirely different from me in almost every respect, and I didn't have much to say. I didn't want to be argumentative, and I just listened, and there wasn't much I could say. But eventually the conversation turned to education. I don't know quite how it happened, but I found myself talking, and I said, well, I don't make any distinction. There were 300 students in my class, and some of them were black, and I'd been accused of being a racist because I made the course hard. That was obviously to flunk out the minorities, they said. In any case, I said, I don't make any distinction in my course. I figure that when they finish, they should know freshman chemistry, and I've kind of cheated them if I don't show them what that is, and that they all have to learn the same material. At least at the end, they have to be judged by the same standard. And this guy, who was different from me in every possible way in life, looked at me and he says, you're right. He says, I know your course is tough because I happen to be tutoring 2 students in your class. But our worst enemies are these white liberals that come over to the third college, teach watered-down classes to our students, and turn them into permanent second-class citizens. And he was right, and he understood this. We have a situation today when we're turning the largest part of our students into second-class citizens. We're cheating them all if we teach them watered-down courses. And that's largely what we have as a result of simplifying the courses in the schools and then giving them grades as though they learned the material anyway. Anyway, to go on with the other part, so there's a quality question, how hard do you make the course, but there's also a question of how many subjects you should teach. In order for the school to look good, you look good if you have lots of things on the list. Zachary starts his first term at college in about a month, and we went up there, and of course he's taking chemistry, and there's a core in chemistry, but there are all kinds of other things on the list. A unit here, and a unit there, and a unit somewhere else. The college can be very proud of all these requirements they have for all these things that sound good that he's going to be exposed to. If you go through a normal high school, there are all kinds of courses, of things and all sorts of things. Some of them are not necessarily teaching correct information, like the environmental studies and the diversity courses and so on, but there are lots of courses. Homeschoolers do this too. The mother wants the very best for her child, so she goes out and finds material on this, and material on this, and material on this. There may be a dozen different things she's teaching, but none of them there's not very much time being spent on them. And again, I go back to the fact I think the children will learn these subjects anyway, but maybe it's important to concentrate on reading, writing, arithmetic, and leave some of those things for the future. I believe that the students should have, when they exit their elementary education, a very good grounding in the things which are, first, certain things that need to be learned early in order to be learned well, and skills that they need to learn early, and also very good study habits. And it's not so important whether some sorts of factual information are left until later. To spend time learning, let's say, a foreign language while you still don't know English very well is, to me, not very sensible. Or to spend a lot of time on geography when you still don't know the language of mathematics, which you will need in order to learn science and engineering, is not very sensible. So in the self-teaching homeschooling that we do, we emphasize math as a core curriculum, and you don't learn it. We don't give any science until they finish calculus. Then give physics and chemistry and teach them at the level it should be with the full language of mathematics. And they have to write a little essay each day, and then they have to read history, literature, and economics books that are written by scholarly people, largely people from the past who have good vocabularies and good sentence structure, and they pick up their sentence structure and vocabulary in this way. Actually, you don't really need to teach grammar. You certainly don't need to teach spelling. You don't need to teach sentence structure, any of these things, because if you read enough, you pick them all up anyway. In fact, I'm not even sure it's a good idea sometimes to teach these things. And so we can communicate. All the kids got ham radio licenses, and it reminded me of the difficulties I had with the Morse code. When I was a kid, first exposure to Morse code was in the Boy Scouts, because I wanted a merit badge for the code. And they had a little, in the Scout manual, they had a little thing. There was a little mnemonic for each code character. A C was a camel and a man and a camel and a man. A dash and a dot and a dash and a dot. Helped you remember it. And an A was an apple and a limb, dot, dash, and so on. I think I can still remember all these mnemonics, even though it's been a lot of years. What happens is when you learn the code that way and then become a ham radio operator, as I did a little bit later, your mind still translates through the mnemonic. So you can do 2 words a minute, 3 words a minute, 5 words a minute. You forget you're using the mnemonic. You get up to about 8 words a minute. That's as far as you go, because your mind can't go through the mnemonic fast enough. It's subliminal, but it's there. You can't go through it fast enough. And so you have a very, very hard time getting your code speed up to 30. Here's a professional ham radio operator over here nodding. Your mind can't go fast enough. So to get up to 13 words a minute for a general license or 20 words a minute for an extra class license is very, very difficult, because you have this odd little gimmick in your mind. Now, I wonder if there's anyone, we've all been talking. I'm trying to talk now. You're all talking. Is anybody here, when he talks, think through the sentence structure of his sentence while he's talking? It's impossible. It may not be impossible. Your mind may still be, if you were taught grammar and taught that you had to stop and think whether you had a subject and direct object, whether you got an adjective or an adverb, you'd go nuts. Your mind, however, if it's still going through, if you've been taught that first, really fundamentally right in the beginning, maybe it's an impediment, because you have to go through all this stuff in order to think. I don't know. I have very little experimental evidence. I had a little experiment on myself. I remember I took the SAT exams for practice when I was a junior in high school, or maybe a sophomore, I guess, a year before you're supposed to take them. Made a really good verbal score. And then in the high school I was in, which was an excellent high school in Houston, they had a whole year of courses, special, preparatory for the college board, because everybody was going to do well in the college boards. So I took the exam, then took a year of high-powered, intense preparatory stuff for the college board, which included a lot of grammar, so I get all those grammar questions right, and made a lower score the next year, applying the rules. Because instead of going by what sounded right, I went by the rules. I think if you listen to people who talk well and speak correctly, I'm not saying my children have the advantage of this. I'm sure you could count up 100 grammar errors already in this talk. But if the people around you speak as well as possible, and if you read, you read voraciously, and you read works by people who were erudite, that had a good vocabulary and good sentence structure, that's where you learn those things, not necessarily from grammar. And from spelling the same way. Spelling, we're working on a little literature curriculum for homeschoolers, and one of the things we put in it were George Washington's diaries. And I was enjoying reading little bits of these. In those days, spelling wasn't very solidified yet. They spelled all different ways because it wasn't standardized. So George's spelling just floats all over the place. He spells the same word 2 or 3 different ways. I guess this means that George wasn't a thoughtful man, or one of the best intellects of the founding fathers, one of the smartest men we've had been fortunate enough to have in our country. But he wasn't a good speller because spelling wasn't even very well solidified in his day. It's sort of arbitrary. And as I say, our kids are a year behind in spelling. until they get to be 17, 18, and then by then they sort of hit that plateau and it's there. So I think it's important, and one of the things that home schools and the public schools and the private schools do is to put in all kinds of subjects because they ought to be there. You get a foreign language, and you get spelling, and you get grammar, and you get vocabulary, and all these things. The second thing is that so I think it's good to simplify, and our experimental work has indicated that the simplification back to reading, writing, and arithmetic is a good one. Another aspect to this is how you organize what the study environment is, let's say. The study environment of the average child in the United States, the people on whom our future depends, it looks something like this. They get up in the morning, they must get ready to go to school. Now they're fresh, their mind is fresh, they're at their highest point of the day, they are getting ready to go to school, then they're eating breakfast, then they're on their way to school, maybe they get on the school bus and so forth. After a couple hours has elapsed, a couple hours of their best hours of the day, they've arrived at the school. Now, we won't talk about the pernicious things that might be in the environment of that school. Let's just talk about the mechanics of that school. They go to their first period class, and they sit down, everybody stops fidgeting, and we'll assume they stop fidgeting, that there actually is good discipline in that class. Then the teacher they have to earn their money, and let's say this is a well-dedicated teacher who wants to do a good job. The teacher has to put on some kind of a show for them. So let's say it's math, and the teacher puts on a show and does a thing, on the blackboard and so forth, gives a lecture, maybe asks some questions, maybe we have this. In any case, you couldn't study in that environment. You're kind of watching the show. And it doesn't go on for very long. About 45 minutes, the bell rings. There's a great falter in the hallway, and everybody rushes to the next class. Then 45 minutes later, the bell rings, everybody rushes to the next class. This happens three or four times, and then it's time for lunch. Everybody rushes out, and you're in a different environment for a while, and you come back. Anyway, you do this, 8, 9 times a day. Each time, the atmosphere in the class is mostly one of noise and confusion and oral talking by this individual. If the teacher's teaching, maybe you get a audio-visual thing and so forth. And you never really have a chance to concentrate. You're not doing any learning or studying on your own. You're not working any problems. You're just in this atmosphere. Then you get on the bus, you go home. Maybe you have some chores to do, or you want to have some fun. Maybe you start watching TV. It's time for dinner. And then if you're in a well-disciplined environment, you do your homework. About 6 o'clock at night, after all of this, you've been up for 12 hours and you've gone through all these things, you sit down to learn by doing your homework. That's when you get to read the book on your own. That's when you get to work maybe a few math problems on your own. You have to squeeze that in because the average kid watches 4 hours of TV every day as well, but you've gotten that worked in along with the homework. The environment isn't very good, even if you were to assume that those were dedicated teachers and nobody got shot in the hallway of the school that day. I mean, it was a very good environment in the school. Still, the rigmarole you were put through was not conducive really to thoughtful work and self-study until you got home and got done with dinner. Secondly, in your environment, there are lots of influences that aren't active. The time watching television. Now, people rail against television sometimes because of what's on there. There shouldn't be the violence, or there shouldn't be the social suggestions, or there shouldn't be these sitcoms where they're making fun of the parents all the time in front of the kids that you hope will obey their own parents. This can all be talked about, but suppose it wasn't there. Suppose the material was all at least socially neutral. Still, it's a passive medium. It isn't conducive to participation in life. It's conducive to watching life. So if you spend 4 hours a day kind of watching this sort of passive medium, which, of course, the reason there's all the violence and everything on there is they're trying to get your attention. You've watched it, and it's passive, and you're going to sleep, and they've got to wake you up, and you're going to sleep. So they get more and more active and stand on their heads trying to get your attention, so you'll be awake during the commercials. But it's still a passive medium instead of an active one. So anyway, talking about a study environment, I could say some things about nutrition, but I won't. I think you should have a good nutritional environment, but particularly you should have a good environment to work in. Now contrast this to a situation where the home has no television, none at all. For starters, everybody's got 4 hours more time every day. That's not just 4 hours out of 24, because how much free time do you really have every day by the time you go to sleep, wake up, travel, do your general work, and so forth? The child may not have more than 10 hours in a day. Now he's got 4 of those back just because television's not there, and you don't have the passive medium. Instead, suppose that the same teaching materials are used that were used in the public schools. I think you can get superior ones because you're not subject to all the political correctness and all the averaging of the bureaucracy, but suppose they're the same materials exactly. But instead, the child gets up on his own schedule. You know, people have different schedules. Some people need to sleep late, some need to sleep early. It's kind of a biological rhythm thing. There's great biochemical individuality. The child gets up, maybe starts work an hour before breakfast, maybe you have to beat on his door to get him to come to breakfast. He doesn't start until he's had breakfast and wakes up. But anyway, on his schedule, when he wakes up, he goes into a room with a large desk and chair and no distractions and a book and starts reading and teaching himself. Say it's his math. He reads his math lesson and he works 30 math problems. Or if it's physics, he reads his physics and works 2 or 3 physics problems. Then he goes on and works some chemistry problems. Or if he's just in, if he's just in math, he works his 30 math problems, and then he does an essay, and then he reads materials that have been selected to teach him. And he sits at that desk, except for bathroom stops and breakfast, about 6 hours, teaching himself in a quiet atmosphere in the same way that he'll have to do throughout life. You know, the show at the public school won't be on all during life, so even if it worked, it won't be there after you're 18 or after you're 22, after you get out of school. But he thinks to himself, working to himself for 6 hours and during his best hours of the day. Then he goes on about his life and does all the other things. That brain has a lot better chance of success than the brain that saw 45 minutes of show in the public school and didn't get to work any math problems until 6 o'clock at night. Even if the materials were the same and all the people were well-meaning, and they weren't spending half the money in the public school on bureaucrats that really make it hard for the teachers. Just if everything were equal, the fact that the child works in a home atmosphere, in a quiet place, on his own, day after day. And this really does work. As I say, we didn't intend to do this way. My wife was going to be the teacher. I have 2 filing cabinets completely full of all the teaching materials she was going to present to the children. And I have another big cabinet full of the books that she was going to use, and all of it implies that there's a teacher there. Well, when she died, there wasn't any teacher there, so we had the self-teaching. I thought at that point, well, the education has gotten poorer, but I don't want them to go to the public schools, so we'll try this. And they sat at the desks, and they gradually worked their way into this, just reading, writing, arithmetic, writing, and reading in that order, 6 hours a day on their own, without any help. And I watched this go along, hoping it would work out. It was very bad at first. The error rate on the math problems was horrendous. But gradually it diminished, and it got lower and lower and lower until it almost vanished. We had a system then. It was that if you missed a math problem, you had to bring it to your father and show him what you missed. I didn't help you work it, but you had to bring it and show me what you missed, and I'm not very sympathetic, so it's not a nice experience. It wasn't that I yelled at them, but you know, it wasn't something you wanted to do. They didn't like to go and show me the things they missed. So with just that much pressure, the error rate went almost to 0. They're working 30 problems a day and not missing much, each at their own grade level. Now, I eventually withdrew that incentive. The way they work, they do read a lesson, work the problems, and then those that they miss, they grade themselves, and those that they miss, they have to rework until they get them right. And but they then had to come and show me what it was they'd missed. Got kind of tired of that because I was busy and there wasn't always around. Anyway, we got kind of lazy, and I'd instead say, well, how'd you do? You know, oh, I only missed 1. Oh, okay, fine. And then I kind of stopped asking, and now we got to a point where maybe every week or so I'd say, how many problems you've been missing? And they didn't have to come to me with each problem. Well, the human mind's a funny thing. Math changed a little bit. It now consisted of, I read the lesson, I work the 30 problems, Then I check the answers, and those I got wrong, I fix. The incentive to get them right the first time was relaxed. The error rate went up to about 10%. So there can be little incentives you put in even without teaching. I've only ever used one economic incentive. I used that on Zachary's scowling. He hates. I've used this on the boys when they got done with physics. They got done with Newtonian mechanics. There were some problems that they gave us at Caltech as freshmen that were very, very difficult. And they didn't really expect us to work them, but they gave them to us for culture. And there were 167 problems called strong problems. And I gave those to them, and I said, I'll give you so much money every time you get one wrong, but I'll take the same amount back every time you get one right. I mean, the other way around, right? Right. I'm sorry, pardon. I'd be broke. No, I mean the other way around. You get one right, and even in these very difficult problems, it really focused their attention. They'd work on the same problem for 2 or 3 days, work it 6 different ways, you know, to check to make sure it came out the same, and the error rate was fairly low even on those. But the general point I'm making is that they worked along this method, not because I thought it was right, not even because I thought it was good, because, I mean, I used to go, I thought I was doing a great deal of good when I went to the lecture hall at UCSD and, you know, 3 times a week and gave these lectures. I was teaching. And I'd go to the lecture hall every night and answer questions till the kids went home, and I was teaching. I'm not so sure I was teaching. The teaching in the way I thought. About 10% of the children really learn, or children in that case, young adults, the kids really learn chemistry. And I think those 10% didn't learn so much by the show I put on at the blackboard. I was learning from the show. I learned a tremendous amount of chemistry because I learned an active knowledge in my subject. I think they learned the way Dr. Merrifield mentioned about children. They learned by example. I think if I put on a good enough show and looked enthusiastic enough, 10% of them really wanted to learn chemistry because they saw my example. Then they taught it to themselves, out of the books and in working their problems and so on. I'm not sure that my show did that much, maybe some. But in any case, we had this sort of self-teaching thing and went along. And I thought, well, what are we going to do when we run out of math problems? We used something called Saxon math, which is actually, that wasn't meant for self-teaching. I've talked to John Saxon twice about his math problems, and both times the conversation have ended with an argument because he doesn't believe you can self-teach with his books. But anyway, we use this system. There are 9 books, and when you get to the end, you get through calculus, then what do you do? And on your own schedule, most of the kids were getting through at about 15. And I thought, well, gee, we're out of material, and what do I do? And I was busy, and I looked around, and I'd find my old freshman physics book from college, and I found the chemistry book I used at UCSD, and I gave them to the child. Said, well, just keep doing the same thing, you know, I'm busy. And the thing that I was astonished, and I'll back up to tell you what I think was happening, when the child, instead of going through the rigmarole I described in school and then trying to teach himself late at night, what happened was he got in a habit. 6 days a week, I say 12 months a year, but we're gone part of the time, so let's say 10 and a half months a year, his brain was trained to think that life consisted of a couple of hours of math every morning, every day, except on Sunday. His brain was used to the idea that it got up in the morning and it read some material and it worked the problem successfully on that material. And it did the same thing over and over and over. Well, it got to be a habit. And the habit just extrapolated right into physics and chemistry. And I'm not exaggerating, went through that without any teacher too. And those are courses that would be unthinkable to teach those in the university without lectures and TAs and all kinds of folderol. People have different abilities. Probably, if you look at what Laura Lee did in life and what I did in life in science and so forth, our abilities in quantitative subjects are above average. Our kids are probably about the same as ours. We're not geniuses and we're not dumb. We're above average. But the comparison was with myself. I don't think that, maybe I can't believe that. I mean, it would be bad for my ego to think that they're a lot smarter than me. But I'm not, I had all the advantages in life when I was a young man and a boy. I went to a very, very good school in Houston, and I had all kinds of advantages and good teachers from the public schools, the best ones there and so forth. And I did pretty well. My record was exceptional. But as I watched these kids go along, every one of them is at least 2 years ahead of anything I ever was in life. At least 2 years ahead. Because I didn't have the advantage of no teacher. I think this is a real viable opportunity. It's also an opportunity in many, I won't talk much longer and then I'll call on you. I think it's a special opportunity because homeschooling is kind of topping out. It consists now of the families that have a mother in the home that has the time to become a full-time teacher. But since we started working on homeschool materials, I've talked to a lot of mothers. And they're sort of desperate because many of them are worried about what they're teaching. Are not so sure they're teaching. In many cases, they don't know the things they want to teach their children. They want their children to know more than they do, just like most parents that are sensible. They want their children to accomplish more in life than they did. And another problem, the majority of American homes don't have any parent that could serve as teacher anyway. But if a child has the opportunity to have a good atmosphere and a very simple curriculum and teach himself, I think he can do better than he can in the public schools, and I think he can do better than he can in the private schools. And I know we never would have found it. And my wife was a very patient person and a very smart lady who was well educated. But I bet if she could watch what had happened accidentally the last 7 years because of her death, that it wouldn't take very long conversation for both of us to agree that our home school wouldn't have any teacher at all. I think it would be the worst thing we could do, would be to have a teacher in our home school. So we have these competing things. The homeschool movement has become huge. Its quality of academics isn't any better than the public schools today or the private schools. It might even be a little worse. It's certainly not any better. The kids in the home schools are performing a little better. The tests show that the homeschoolers have a little higher score on their tests. This can be misleading because remember, these are homes where the parents and the whole family is so dedicated to education that they've taken their kids out of the public schools and gone to all this trouble to homeschool. So they're not a random selection of kids. But better materials are becoming available, and I think that is a better environment to learn in. The important thing is to have free enterprise and competition. And we have 3 competing systems in the United States, and the whole future of our country, the whole future of our civilization depends upon whether our kids become people who can think and have the skills necessary to make us superior in the world. And it's going to take more and more skills. We're all applauding the fact that the Soviet people, or to some extent the Soviet people, and we hopefully soon the Chinese people, and all the people in the world will break free of totalitarianism, will no longer be suppressed by tyranny. That gives you, just in China alone, 1 billion competitors, and they're smart people. And we're going to have to be smarter and smarter to compete in the world. We can't just kind of coast on what the previous generations have done. So we have to have the very best educational system, and that best educational system might be in the kids themselves. In any case, in our society today, we have 3 major competing forms of education. Private education, private paid-for education, and public education, and homeschool education. And in the homeschool education, or in the homeschool education, there are 2 subdivisions, I think. One is that with a teacher, and then without a teacher. On the basis of very little experimental evidence, I think that the 4th option, the one of self-teaching in a home school, is the better one. But what I think doesn't matter. All of these things should be in competition with each other on a level playing field, and then see what happens. They are in competition, except that there's a tremendous subsidy to one of them because it's a socialized system. It's also socialized and subsidized by the most pernicious tax in our society. Income tax, we all hate to pay income tax, but they take part of the money on the way past. But at least the money was there. Our public schools are financed mostly by property taxes. The retired couple saves all their life, pays for their home, and then the government says to them, if you don't have the cash, we take your house. It's a very pernicious tax because everybody in the society has to be looking over his shoulder saying, I better get a hold of some cash this year. If I can't rent my house from the government for another year, they'll take it away from me. So it's a very pernicious tax. but I wouldn't support the public schools even on another form of taxation. I think if the government wants to be in the education system, they should compete. In fact, if they want a Head Start, and I don't think their program Head Start is doing the kids any good, but if they want a Head Start for themselves, fine. Let them take a big pile of money and capitalize their own system, and then walk away from it, and let it compete on a level playing field with the private schools and the home schools. And I'm sure that they would be blown away. If not, maybe they won't be. Maybe the bureaucrats are brilliant and they can think up the best educational system. If they can, that's fine. Private enterprise and public demand will show which it is. But these are options. Homeschooling's not an oddity. It's not a bunch of Christians running around in the corner trying to keep their kids from seeing people who don't believe in the Bible. It's a very powerful force in our society. It may be, if it turns out to be the best form of education, the thing that saves our society. The only other really powerful forces I see are the immigrants coming in who have different study ethics. Dr. Kamen and I remember visited, you remember when we went to UCSD that day, we went to UCSD one day to do some business, and we had to wait for the man we were going to see, and so we stopped in the science library for an hour or so just to browse around, have something to read while we were waiting. I was astonished by one thing. I didn't see anybody in the whole library the whole time I was there that wasn't an Asian. Now with affirmative action being removed from California, I understand that the majority of the kids at Berkeley will be Asians. That's terrific, because that's always been true of immigration. You know, the best people are the ones that run to where freedom is. Our government made a terrible mistake when they suppressed the immigration of the people from Hong Kong. I mean, just unbelievable. Take the worst, most desolate place in Arizona with nothing to recommend it. Give it to the people in Hong Kong. It'd be the most thriving place in the world in 20 years. But we have several real reasons for optimism in our society. One is the immigrants, and another, I think, is the homeschooling. If it's not the best form, at least it's a way of kind of breaking up and stirring the educational pot in our country, which hasn't really been doing its job. It's a subject none of us really know much about. Sometimes they get so far off we know something. I mean, the public schools, they have new things. And some of them, these changes occur gradually, and then when they come out the other end, to a rational person, they look crazy, and you can write funny stories about them and start raving mad, but I guess they get there by steps, and the people don't really realize what's happening to them. But something like the new philosophy of reading that they have, where the idea is that the text doesn't contain the meaning. That the text is only there to trigger the imagination of the reader. And in the historical context of his environment and the nature of his imagination all interact with the words to create a unique interpretation of the book. That's whole language. And that's the new fad, and it's a tremendous industry. It's making a lot of people rich and famous in our public educational system. I don't know how you learn mathematics that way, but that's the new system. And so there are some things that are obviously crazy. But if we had competition between the three, and we do now have competition between the three, and this is, I think, a real reason for optimism. I'm in the position in this that I'd be in the lab if I'd run 2 or 3 quick and dirty experiments, and gee, one of them came out in a way I hadn't expected, but it really looks like it'd be interesting, and I think I understand it, and I think it's better than the experiments that I've been doing before or the ones that the guy over at the other lab is doing. I'm not sure, but it makes sense, and it's a problem I need to solve because Dr. Kamen's going to ask next week how I'm doing. In this case, the whole world is going to ask through free competition how America's doing, and right now our schools aren't doing too well. I think they are standing between our kids and what they would be learning rather than what they'd be learning spontaneously. It's a very important problem to our society, and I don't think we should, any of us, get behind and support any particular kind of education, but we should always support total competition in education and prevent our laws and regulations from inhibiting any of the competing forms. I'll stop talking, that's enough, but thank you. Any questions? I know. I'm sure you're all tired of sitting there, but I'll answer a couple of questions. He had his hand up first.
Just a comment, I think there's no question most of us would agree that the very most important lessons are taught to our children, possibly at home, both through example and instruction, perhaps sometimes through deterrence and retribution. But they learn a lot of their most important lessons at home. But the one problem that I see with homeschooling on the scale you described is what your kids don't get is what I call survival skills. They don't learn communication with their peers. They don't learn how to get to and from school in different kinds of weather. They don't learn how to interact with the adults who are sort of supervising. And those are all what I sort of consider survival skills, and there's a long list. But simply being able to communicate with both adults and your peers and to get along, to play games, to do sports, those are things that you will never be able to teach at home. And you cannot teach them out of a book.
Well, there's experimental evidence. Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Edison, these were not social misfits. They could communicate with their peers. You're surrounded by your peers. This is one of the last arguments of people. It's used repeatedly, but it's nuts. We're surrounded by people. People come all the time to our home. Other children come to our home. They have no trouble learning to interact with people. I don't. It's true. I think they'd be a little lost on the average public school playground. They don't have some of the survival skills it necessarily needs to survive right now on that playground. I had to go. Noah was, and you're right in a way, but in a way that I don't think is the important point. Noah had to take his PSATs, so we took him over to a school, a private Christian school, not a public school, where they were giving the PSAT. And Matthew was 7 at the time, and Matthew and I had to stand around and wait for him, and we were standing out there at recess. Wham! Kids came out for recess. And Matthew just sort of stood there with his mouth open. He couldn't quite believe what was happening on that playground. And he wasn't really prepared to participate in what was going on that playground. And I'm just as glad of that. I don't really want him to participate in what was going on in that playground until he's old enough to take it. But I think that the important thing is the interaction with thoughtful people and interaction with the people that your parents select. I don't care. It can be somebody who's completely different from me, has completely different philosophy. Their family has a right to select the kind of people they want their children to emulate and be a part of. Children learn by example, and we're letting the example be that provided by the state. And I don't think it's a particularly good example. As far as basic interaction with adults and other children and so forth, this is a part of every homeschool. You're not totally isolated just because you're doing your studying by yourself. It's just that doesn't happen. Sure, they're quiet. They can be quiet. We would go on a trip, and after Laura died, we'd travel. We had to go all together on our civil defense trips and so on, and stop in a public restaurant. Now, table manners were awful, just terrible. There's no mother there, there's just a father. And my table manners aren't that good, unless I really try. I try not to spill things at places like this. But the table manners are terrible. I mean, the food's dropping under the table. It's just not good. They're better now. I'm talking about 6 years ago. But what would happen to us repeatedly, 3 or 4, maybe every third stop, every fourth stop in a normal restaurant, before we'd finish, usually an older couple that was leaving, would come over and they'd say, "I want to compliment you on how well behaved your children are." Well, they weren't behaving in any unusual way, just sitting there eating dinner. They just didn't understand that it was their job to tear the restaurant down. Now, I agree. If they had been in the normal system, they would have understood that it was their job to tear the restaurant down, but I don't think that's necessarily what they should learn. In any case, the idea they don't interact with adults and children is crazy, and the best interaction, the most important interaction, is that with the parent. I'm astonished. People talk about, I have to have quality time with my child. Well, keep them at home and serve as an example for them and enjoy them. There are all kinds of time. And the time can and things can be odd. I'm the father, there's no mother. The girls have to put up with me. It's worse, I'm sure, for them than it is for the boys. But different forms of communication can open up that you'd be surprised at. They won't, kids won't say a lot of things to you that that they might be thinking, that they will write. And I got a little system. They have to write a page essay every day, and they'll write things to me that I would never learn otherwise, except because of that. I still remember an essay I got, Daddy's Eyes. Daddy's eyes see everything that you didn't do, you know, and don't see the things you did right. But the interaction with the parents is far superior in a homeschool. There are all kinds of adults that the parents interact with. There are all kinds of kids in the neighborhood, or the kids that come in because there are other homeschoolers, or the people they know at church or whatever for them to interact with. It's a selective interaction, but it's not survival skills. That's right. They'd be absolutely wiped out in the streets of Harlem. And they would have to take a while to adjust to the public school playground. But I think they're learning skills in a good environment, and those skills. I'm sorry, yeah.
Out of the 7, are there any that disagree with self-teaching? Do you have any rebellion?
Well, there's 6, because the one is a visitor from out of town with whom they are interacting. We've imported her, you know. She's also homeschooled, so they have a problem. It took me 3 days to get them to talk to each other, but after that is I'm not making fun of you, but the argument is so pervasive. I'm saying I don't know, because the issue never comes up. They literally never. It would be unthinkable in our house to say, Daddy, I don't like math, or I don't want to do my math this morning. It wouldn't happen. And it wouldn't happen because anybody has ever been punished for not doing his math, or that anybody's even had discussion about it. It's just that we do that. It's like eating breakfast. So I'm sure that let's put it this way, they don't know any better. Because you don't, even in a molecule, Dr. Merrifield separates his peptide derivatives in a separatory funnel. It's an organic phase, the inorganic phase, the molecule decides where it's going to go based on its own structure. Decisions are all like this are always either or, and they don't know any better. They don't have the option. Yeah.
Your ideas sound so wonderful, and yet they're so unusual. It's hard for some of us to visualize how it happens. I'm wondering if you and your kids would consider doing a demonstration of self-teaching in a quasi-homeschool environment at our next meeting.
Well, I don't know about that. We're just finishing a set of 6 CD-ROMs. They're trying to teach this and provide materials, but I don't know about. Should we put desks? That would be terrific. Boy, frozen solid. Everybody would believe him. They wouldn't be able to move. Yeah. Her in the back. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that I congratulate you on being able to find out something like that by accident. Like major things in the world have been found out by accident.
Yeah.
I think that children in tough environments where they are learning to think for themselves and use their brains couldn't prepare them for anything in the world and all the challenges they face. As long as they know how to be thoughtful. I have a teenager and 2 of them. And I think that comes from the educational system. There's so much socializing going on around them. I think their brains, I know a lot of people have teenagers in the social psychiatry, think of teenagers as being brain dead. The other thing I'd like to say is that as far as interaction with people, when we get out into the real world, I don't think there's any interaction more difficult than those with our own family. I think a lot of people who come from big families agree with me. I think that people might have most arguments with kids without the kids members of my family and my mother. Not to mention cousins, et cetera. So I think if you learn to get along peacefully with your parents, you can probably handle anybody else.
Thank you. I'll take your question in a second. I wanted to say one other thing I forgot about. It's a further form of self-teaching. I haven't embarrassed all of them yet. I got one left, so I'm going to embarrass him. When the second oldest boy went into physics, now because they started the Saxon math at different times, and because there aren't quite as many books as it would take really to cover the whole period, that's one of the reasons they're getting through with calculus so early. He got finished with his calculus a little earlier than his brother had, just not because of ability, they're about the same in ability, but because of the mechanics. And they had a physics book, also put out by Saxon, which I said, well, Hey, you're kind of young. Why don't you try the Saxon physics book? Do the problems in that, then we'll give you the Caltech physics book. So he did that, and it was just exactly what you'd expect from the experiment. The book doesn't use any calculus. It's watered down physics. Then he hit the Caltech physics, had to unlearn what he'd learned before, and it was harder. Not easier, harder. He'd been better off to skip the whole watered down physics thing, which was pretty close to what you get in high school physics today. But in any case, the consequences of this were that, and he's struggling, and he's sort of a perfectionist. He is a perfectionist. He's still kicking himself because he missed a problem on the SAT math, 1. But he was having trouble with his physics. And his error rate rose to 30%. He was getting the wrong answer 30% of the time. And then I read a book about another kind of self-teaching. It's really a monograph, a little paperback, about oral self-teaching. This guy had failed out of college. In fact, he claimed he made straight F's. It's hard to believe. But in any case, he failed out of college. And so he was flunked out. He left the college, and he come back in a year, tried again. He failed out again. Then he hit upon a different method. He would go to his room at night, and he'd lecture to the walls and to the dresser and to a group that wasn't there. He'd lecture to an imaginary class about the subject. He'd take his notes in his book and he'd lecture to the class. And so I said, why don't we try this? So the boys have a press room where they print Access to Energy with Peter's Press, and it's kind of an isolated place. So now he takes his physics and chemistry book and he goes off to this isolated place. No one in the family has ever heard him do this. And he takes the book section by section. He lectures to an imaginary class. And his error rate's almost 0. He said he's through the material quicker, learns it better. The syndrome you get into in physics, you know how it works. You read the material, kind of your eyes glazed over, you're a little bit tired, it was boring. Then you have a problem. You go searching back through the pages to find the equation. You think you found the right equation, then you use dimensional analysis as a kind of a crutch to see if it looks reasonable. That's the syndrome. Everybody, I hope most of some of you, at least that's the way I got trapped many times in physics. But that syndrome started to disappear in place of understanding. This is oral self-teaching, and it's superb, it's amazing. It's another step. But you can't have one classroom. You have to have everybody has to have a press room, or one for each child, I suppose. You have to have an isolated place, but it also is a very powerful technique. Sorry, yeah.
I wonder what gives a little importance to foreign language, especially as online there's so much more receptive to it when they're younger.
Yeah, I understand.
I was raised in Israel, and we had to take English as a
Yeah.
foreign language from 3rd grade on, and I'm certainly glad we did. And I don't think it took away from my ability to express myself in my native language.
No, I'm sure it didn't. This is my opinion, as I think I stated. This is opinion on the basis of very little experimentation. My feeling about it is this: not that foreign language isn't important. A language is a means of communication. You have to know the language to communicate. Now, obviously, if you don't speak English in today's world, that's a bigger problem. So it's more important to learn English at an early age. It's not a nationalistic statement. It's a statement about the world. But even if that weren't the case, suppose we're talking about learning the language of Israel, or French, or something like this. I think you should learn the language if you want to learn it for fun, like one of the oldest boys teaching himself some other language now for fun. But I think you should learn it when you need it. But the problem is not that you would learn. It seems to me the brain has almost only so much time, and that it's my feeling that at the early age they should be learning things which they have to learn then, and they can't learn as well later, and that are very important, like mathematics. I think your brain's active all day, including when you're asleep. So you spend 2 hours working math problems, and it spins on the other 22 hours on the subject. It does the same thing on all the other things you put into it. But you have to budget its time and give it just the things that seem most important. And on my scale of values, I put the foreign language of lesser importance. Maybe my own experience, I didn't really like learning foreign languages from classes, but I never had a need for one except when I decided I had a reason to go to France for 3 months. after I was out of graduate school. I had to go for 3 months. So I took a Berlitz course and went to France and spoke French. I mean, it wasn't too difficult. And the Berlitz people claim they can take a 60-year-old businessman and put him through their course and make him almost accent-free in a couple of months. In other words, I think it's something that's very important when you need it, but you can learn it any time in life. And on my scale of values, it doesn't get up to the other things that I want to put in their brains at that age. That's an opinion. It may not be correct, but it's my opinion. Yeah. We're just him, and if there's one more, and that'll be all. We got to. I don't keep everybody here.
There's one very minor point.
Yeah.
In the state of Washington, there's a big self-schooling activity, as you know.
Uh-huh.
The people there are trying to eliminate the word public schools. We call them government schools to get the people educated in what they are.
Yep. That's why I've been calling them socialized schools. The same reason. It's very important. I think you're right. One more, and we can talk later in private, but I don't want to keep everybody here after the 5 o'clock, which is what it was supposed to be. Yes.
You were talking about this whole language and as opposed to phonics, I presume.
What?
As opposed to phonics?
Yeah, I guess in a way, although phonics is the early way of starting. This is the whole thing. This includes past phonics, just reading itself.
I think a lot of people are very much against teaching it any other way besides phonics.
Yeah.
In the very early. And yet you were talking about using these, your brain is slowed down.
Yeah.
And using those little pictures that you had
Mhm.
for Morse code. And where the same thing happens when a person learns phonics is that he tends to sound out the words. And there are problems with learning phonics first. I believe in learning phonics. But I think that you should get in the habit of reading fast as you can, even if you don't understand it all perfectly, but before you're taught phonics. And
I understand what you're saying. I haven't got the slightest idea what goes on in the brain when it reads. I support strongly phonics, and I guess I support it as opposed to other systems. I'm in the category you're thinking about. I think that kids should be taught phonics. I think it for this reason. I read the materials that were written by the previous generations of Americans who were taught phonics. And I read the materials that are written by those in more recent times that weren't. I know that the earlier people learned to read very well. I see people around me who learned by phonics. I learned by phonics and so forth. I know it works, and that people can become extremely well-educated and very good readers and very fast readers, and in a sense reading is fundamental to your whole intellectual life. I guess I know it works, and it works very well. I haven't got the slightest idea whether it works, and there are probably other things that would work better if we knew about it. I'd be afraid to take a chance. And that's why I support phonics. I know it works. I'm afraid to take a chance on somebody else's experiment, because we have generations of experience with it, and it worked beautifully. That's the reason I support it, not because I know it's better than the other. I wouldn't take a chance. That's why my opinion is so strong about phonics. But you have a different opinion, and in a free environment.
I don't have a different opinion altogether.
But you know what I mean, yeah.
Phonics.
Yeah.
It just,
Well,
I think
whether it's the first thing you learn.
Jump all over this idea of not having phonics first.
Yeah.
I don't really understand the idea behind it.
Well, really, what I would say, the value of diversification, the value of in government, the federal government, the powers delegated to the states. So we'd have 50 states. The value in diversity of and decentralization is that all of these different ideas can be tried in society simultaneously by different groups, and those that are superior rise. The problem we have with the socialized schools is that they all decide on a new fad, and then that experiment is done on the entire American population of children, and it's not even done with a control group. And anyway, I support phonics because I know it works, not because I know it's the best. Let's quit. Thank you very, very much for coming. Very much appreciated.